Hello, I'm Sherry Hutt, the host of your Cruise Through History video series and the author of the Cruise Through History series of storybooks. Today I'd like to take you to Bermuda. So close to the United States. Many cruise travelers, first-time travelers, enjoy going to Bermuda. They find that it's close, it's English-speaking, and they consider it safe and clean. But I would add that it's imbued with history. That's the draw. So I have many stories of Bermuda, so many that I included them in itinerary 8 of Mexico and the Caribbean. Although Bermuda is not part of the Caribbean, it's part of the North American waters. So I also included it in itinerary 6, where we'll go today for our story, ports of the Atlantic coast of North America. And we'll make 3 stops in Bermuda. We'll stop in St. George's, the first capital. Then we'll go to Hamilton, the capital today, and finally to the Royal Naval Dockyards. Bermuda was on the maps of Spanish seamen since 1505, when Juan Bermudez made a stop on the island and his men came ashore for water. They were superstitious sailors and they were chased away by demons that came from under the bush and shouted at them, "Go home, kaha, kaha," actually the cry of the Bermuda Island Petrel. Juan Bermudez noted Bermuda, although it was not an honor to have his name attached to the island, that he considered the Isle of the Devils a place to avoid. In 1609, leaving from the docks in England, were the travelers on the Sea Venture under Admiral Sir George Somers, coming to the north coast of North America to revive, to relieve and give much needed supplies to the Virginia colony. On their way, they were beset by a huge storm. Shakespeare would call it the Tempest, and they landed on the rocks of Bermuda. They were relieved to find that their fate would not be certain death at sea, but then they discovered they were on the Isle of Devils and they were concerned. But Sir George Somers knew better. He planted a garden because he didn't know how long his people would be there. And for 9 months, they enjoyed the beauty and the color and the sunshine on Bermuda. And you can visit Somers' garden today, where he planted those first crops meant to sustain people on the island. And there's a memorial to Sir George. There's also a memorial to the first landing on the beach. And when you're in St. George's, you'll see that Sir Thomas Gates, who was one of the passengers on the ship, who was destined to become the next governor of the Virginia colony, directed the construction of the Deliverance, the ship that would take people the rest of the way to North America. Well, when they arrived in the Virginia colonies, they found that it was much better in Bermuda than in the struggling colony. And Sir George came back to the island to retrieve the rest of the crops to feed people in the Virginia colony. While he was there, he suffered a heart attack, and his nephew made certain that his body went back to England. But it's said that his heart remains in the tomb, Somers' tomb, in Somers' garden in St. George's Town. Well, we'll move on now. We'll leave St. George's and we'll go to our next port of Hamilton, where history continues. Governor Hamilton moved the capital to Hamilton in 1790. Of course, he named it after himself. And there we'll see the Sessions House, the Bermuda Parliament, which is in the original building, although that new facade with those two towers, those clock towers, were put in place for Queen Victoria's Jubilee. Otherwise, much the same. And very close by is the Courts building with a lovely, lovely garden. This is the capital of Bermuda today. As we go along Front Street, we see many of the buildings, many of the businesses in Bermuda. Bermuda, as I said, was never successful in produce or shipbuilding. You can see the remnants of salt ponds, but salt was never a wonderful marketable export. Today, Bermuda does well in tourism and in business, such as the reinsurer AIG, which is located in Bermuda. Well, when we consider the success of tourism as a major economic generator in Bermuda, credit goes to Princess Louise, the daughter of Queen Victoria. She was also the wife of the Governor General of Canada. And winters in Canada were so very cold. They are so very cold. So Princess Louise came to Bermuda, and she brought with her an entourage and followers, and it became the place to go in the 1880s. In 1885, the Princess Hotel was dedicated in her honor, and it stands today as an icon in Hamilton. Beautifully preserved and restored. Unfortunately, the hotel has international art, even though it sits within a wonderful city of homegrown artists. As we walk down Front Street, we see what enchanted so many people coming to Bermuda. Mark Twain came to Bermuda 8 times by 1910. He was enchanted by what he called the snowy houses. The Bermudians, always needing fresh water, build their houses so that they have these clean white roofs where water is captured and sent down to cisterns below, giving them their water supply. And the houses themselves are painted fabulous colors of pink and blue and greens. As you look at these houses with their snowy roofs and their colorful exteriors, the salty critic of so much, Mark Twain, was captivated, and he enchanted his readers with Bermuda, such that tourism grew as well. Well, we continue on in Hamilton, and we walk down the streets and look in the shops, and you'll see the cathedral. Actually, the first cathedral was to be built in St. George's, and today it remains unfinished. It's considered the unfinished church. It's not a remnant of what was there. At some point, the congregation was too large for the church, so in the midst of building, the construction was abandoned and a new cathedral was built in the new capital in Hamilton. But today, many brides come to Bermuda for location weddings to be married in the unfinished church. So the unfinished church is enjoying so many weddings today, more than were ever anticipated in the late 18th century when its foundations were first dug. Another aspect of the islands that's iconic is its history in the arts. Over the centuries, many artists came to Bermuda for the light and the color. Landscape painter Winslow Homer, Georgia O'Keeffe, Cubist Marsden Hartley, Joseph Stella, watercolorist Ambrose Webster, they all came to paint and join local artists and transplants who came to paint the ships and the snowy houses so enjoyed by Mark Twain, some of whom never left. And these paintings can be seen when you visit. Many are in the Masterworks Gallery and Museum just outside of Hamilton. Or if you're in downtown Hamilton at the City Hall with the spire with the boat on top, you can go to the 3rd floor where the Bermuda Art Society has an ongoing selection, ongoing exhibits representative of the artists of Bermuda. Well, we must sail now to our third stop. Take the ferry or your ship or a bus across the Hamilton Harbor to the Royal Naval Dockyards. At the beginning of the 19th century, when sea battles to enforce commerce and dominance at sea were a priority, the Duke of Wellington came to Bermuda and built forts throughout the island. His thought was that they could build ships on the island that could sail anywhere. And he took that Bermuda stone. You can see the forts, notably Fort St. Catherine at one end of the island, but you can see forts as we go around all of the various ports and the walls of remnant forts in neighborhoods today. What the Duke of Wellington didn't count on when he ordered the construction of the Royal Naval Dockyards was that Bermuda stone, while strong and impenetrable, was also porous. It was a very poor structure for storage. And so the Royal Naval Dockyards was never a success as a shipyards, even though soldiers and convicts toiled from the 1820s to build this campus of storage buildings and docks and the long building for administrative offices that we call the clock tower today. Instead, the dockyards were moved to the Virgin Islands. And so the dockyards remained empty for most of its history. In fact, it's enjoying its highest and best use today as the home of artists and art galleries and shops and pubs. And so if your ship docks at King's Wharf at the Royal Naval Dockyards, you'll wander through some of these shops and meet some of these artists. Also on the island is the Bermuda National Museum. It began as the commissioner's house for the dockyards, a point that sits high above the walls on the bluff as we come to the docks. The commissioner wasn't there very long, and of course many of these buildings sat empty. Today that building houses the museum, and it's fascinating to look at the collection that began as a maritime collection and then added objects from tourism and various stages of history in Bermuda. So the building as well as the contents make for a fabulous visit. And when you're there, dwell in the stairwell where there's a mural that's been painted for all of the points in the history of Bermuda, of St. George's, Hamilton, and the Royal Naval Dockyards. Fortunate are those who go to all three of these stops. You might dock in any one, you might take a bus or a ferry across the harbor. You might note that there's a recent history of Bermuda as well. There's a military history there. There was an air base, and Bermuda played an important part during the Cuban Missile Crisis as a strategic base for Britain and for the United States. Wherever you go, you'll enjoy the color. You'll see the snowy houses that enchanted Mark Twain, and you'll have a lovely time in this island. Wherever you go, there are so many stories in so many ports. I enjoy sharing them with you. And so until we meet on ship or another one of these videos, be well.